The phenomenon of remakes is one of the most striking trends of recent years in the gaming industry. It reflects both the evolution of technology and the desire of players to relive experiences that marked entire generations. Remakes have a very strong emotional appeal, as they connect with the nostalgia of those who grew up playing classics and, at the same time, offer a chance for new generations to get to know these titles in modern and accessible versions. However, it's curious to see how this wave of remakes also shows a certain difficulty for the industry to take risks. Many companies prefer to revisit guaranteed past successes rather than create something completely new, which is understandable from a commercial point of view, but raises debates about creativity and innovation. Among all the remakes released in this modern era, the one for Resident Evil 4 is perhaps the clearest symbol of how a studio can transform something already impeccable into an even more polished experience. The 2005 original was already a watershed moment, redefining the over-the-shoulder action genre and influencing practically every third-person shooter that came after. When Capcom announced the remake, I confess I was apprehensive. How could you improve a game that was already almost perfect? But the result completely surprised me. The remake doesn't try to replace the classic. It complements it, reinforcing its value and proving how a good adaptation can honor the past without being limited by it. The technical aspect of Resident Evil 4 Remake is a spectacle in itself. The use of the Re-engine transformed the game's world into a much more living and atmospheric environment, where every shadow, sound, and detail reinforces the climate of constant tension. I felt that the remake respects the rhythm of the original, but intensifies the immersion. The enemy's behavior is more unpredictable, combat requires more strategy, and Leon's fluid movement provides a sense of control that the 2005 game simply couldn't offer at the time. It's like revisiting a known place, but realizing there are new secrets on every corner and new scares waiting in every dark corridor. What really impressed me was the way the remake reconstructs the narrative tone and the portrayal of the characters. Leon, for example, now has a more human, less caricatured weight, and this greatly helps to give seriousness to the story. Ashley was also redesigned in a way that makes her more expressive and less bothersome from a gameplay perspective, which was one of the main complaints about the original. There's a greater sensitivity in the script. It's a more mature, more psychological horror, without losing the charm and humor that characterize the series. This narrative evolution shows that a remake can be more than a graphical update. It can also refine the soul of the game. Comparing it with other recent remakes, like those of Resident Evil 2 and 3, the fourth title finds a perfect balance between fidelity and reinvention. While the Resident Evil 2 remake opted for more daring reinterpretations, and the 3 ended up cutting important parts of the original content, the Resident Evil 4 remake seems to understand exactly what the audience expects: an expansion, not a replacement. Capcom knew how to listen to the fans and use the lessons learned from the previous versions to deliver the most complete remake it has ever produced. It's that kind of game that makes us rethink what the term remake really means, not just redoing, but reimagining with purpose. In my view, Resident Evil 4 Remake synthesizes the peak of this era of remakes. It delivers nostalgia and modernity in equal measure, does justice to the legacy of a historic franchise, and still serves as an example of how the past can inspire the future without being stuck in it. Instead of a simple retrieval, it functions as a living tribute to the original work, made with care, ambition, and a deep understanding of what makes a game timeless. Seeing Capcom's care in every detail, from the ambient sound to the characters' facial expressions, is to realize that the remake was made with love. The phenomenon of remakes, when well executed, as in the case of Resident Evil 4, proves that revisiting the past doesn't mean a lack of ideas. It can also be an exercise in respect and improvement. Of course, there are many remakes that emerge just to profit from nostalgia, but this is not one of them. Resident Evil 4 Remake is a work that reaffirms the power of memory, emotion, and reinvention. Playing this title isn't just remembering a classic, it's feeling the impact of a game that remains relevant, even almost 20 years later.
You will receive our most sacred body.
The natural cycle of releases in the games industry is relentless. Every month, dozens of new titles fight for space in the public's attention, and this creates an environment where even the biggest releases have an ephemeral glow. It's curious because we live in an era where promotion and pre-launch hype build enormous expectations. But, shortly after release, the collective focus shifts to the next big game. This accelerated pace is due to the excess of supply and the way media consumption in general has become fast and disposable. That sense of permanence that classics from the past had has been diluted by the constant flow of new things. Even excellent games, the ones that define an era, end up being swallowed by the avalanche of new announcements and trailers. This applies strongly to remakes, even the most popular ones. Think about the case of Resident Evil 4 Remake. The game was a phenomenon at launch, dominated social media, generated millions of views, debates, comparisons with the original, and yet a few months later, it's barely spoken of anymore. This doesn't happen for lack of quality, but because the gaming culture itself has changed. The public consumes the content, comments intensely for 1 or 2 weeks, and then moves on to the next title. This cycle is brutal, but it seems inevitable. Current games are designed for the moment of impact, the launch, the viralization, and not so much for longevity in the public conversation. The problem is that, in this process, we lose some of the ability to appreciate experiences calmly. I miss that feeling of playing something for months, exploring every detail, revisiting levels, talking about the game with friends long-term. Today, this relationship is replaced by a dynamic of rapid consumption and permanent rotation. When a remake like Resident Evil 4's leaves the spotlight so quickly, it doesn't mean it was forgotten, but that the cultural space it occupies is smaller than it deserved. The cycle is so accelerated that a game needs to be constantly updated, receive expansions, extra modes, or collaborations to stay alive in the collective memory. This behavior isn't the player's fault, but that of a system that values the launch more than the maintenance. The companies themselves feed this, concentrating massive marketing campaigns just before launch and moving on to the next project right after. It's as if the entire industry has gotten used to the ephemeral. The result is a succession of short peaks of enthusiasm, followed by almost total silence. Even remakes of legendary classics, which carry decades of history, are subject to this logic, which reveals how volatile the public's attention has become. Still, there's a curious layer to all this. Even when the public discussion cools down, the games remain in the individual imagination. Resident Evil 4 Remake, for example, may have left the headlines, but it continues to be revisited by players seeking a second gameplay, or who simply appreciate the refined design with more calm. The internet, paradoxically, accelerates collective forgetting, but also preserves the record of experiences. It's a cycle of erasure and remembrance at the same time, where a game never completely disappears. It just changes place, moving from the center of discussion to the effective memory of the players. I see this as a reflection of our time. Everything is made to consume fast, react fast, and forget fast. But games like the Resident Evil 4 Remake prove that there are works that resist this dynamic. When a title is truly striking, it may disappear from the media, but it doesn't disappear from the minds of those who lived that experience. It's a subtle difference between being a topic and being remembered, and great games, even within this chaotic cycle, manage to be remembered. The problem is that the industry, focused on metrics and numbers, still doesn't know how to measure this type of lasting impact. The natural cycle of releases is the price of abundance. We have more incredible games than ever, but less time and space to absorb them. It's a modern paradox. The more options we have, the more superficial our relationship with each one becomes. Remakes, even the best-made ones, end up trapped in this whirlwind. They shine brightly, then fade away too quickly. Maybe it's time to rethink this pace, to value a game's after more than just its before. Because sometimes, it's in the post-launch silence that a game shows how much it truly deserves to be remembered. The nostalgia surrounding Resident Evil 4 Remake is, without a doubt, one of the most powerful engines that drove its initial success. The emotional appeal of revisiting scenarios, characters, and themes that made history is intense, especially for those who played the original countless times. But the curious thing is that this nostalgia, despite being strong, tends to be fleeting. Right after the initial impact and the emotion of the reunion, a feeling of déjà vu arises. That feeling of having already lived all the situations, faced the same villains, and witnessed the same key moments of the plot, which naturally reduces the interest of many players in the long run. This déjà vu experience doesn't happen by chance. Resident Evil 4 is so iconic and influential that it became a reference even for other games in the franchise, like Resident Evil Village, which openly took inspiration from the fourth game. Therefore, when playing the remake, not only those who know the original end up feeling like they are repeating experiences, but even players who have gone through recent titles in the series notice aesthetic and mechanical similarities. In these cases, the impact of nostalgia is turbocharged by past memories, but it is also diluted by this repetition of familiar formulas and scenarios. The Resident Evil 4 remake presents undeniable technical advancements, improved graphics, revamped controls, and more sophisticated AI. These are improvements that catch the eye on first contact, but for those who have the original game fresh in their memory, they may not be enough to renew the sense of discovery and challenge. After the initial enchantment, the journey becomes too comfortable, too known. The dangers, the puzzles, and the bosses no longer surprise as much. The game almost becomes a celebration of what has already been experienced, and less an invitation to new experiences. I also noticed that nostalgia ends up working as a double-edged sword. It heightens the excitement, but at the same time, limits the desire to revisit the remake multiple times. In the past, playing Resident Evil 4 for the second, 10th, or 20th time was synonymous with finding new ways to overcome obstacles, exploring the meticulousness of the scenarios, and challenging one's own mastery over its systems. In the remake, many are content to beat it once, complete some achievements, and then move on. That impulse to marathon and delve indefinitely, something the original version instigated in those most passionate about the genre, is missing. This becomes even more evident when we follow players' accounts on social media. Many share the same sentiment. The nostalgia was overwhelming in the first few hours, but it didn't sustain prolonged interest. Then comes the desire to keep the game in memory as a tribute to the past, instead of making it an active part of the gaming routine. The remake is praised for its fidelity and respect for the original, but also for not daring too much, which leaves many fans with that mission accomplished feeling, without the desire to explore much beyond that. Capcom even tried to dodge this phenomenon by including extra content, new systems, and improving the dialogue, but the essence remains tied to what was exciting in the past. I see that nostalgia is fundamental for initial commercial success, serving as a bridge between generations, but it proves to be a limiting factor for longevity. The remake is celebrated as a tribute, but few incorporate it into their routine as they did with the classic. The déjà vu cannot be avoided when the proposal is to revisit what has already been so widely explored by thousands of players. I believe that Resident Evil 4 Remake makes clear the dilemma of great remakes. They awaken unforgettable memories, but they cannot, or perhaps do not even intend to, sustain the same cycle of enthusiasm as the original game. For those who have already traversed every corner of that village, faced its horrors, and saved Ashley more times than they can count, the remake will always be a nostalgic spectacle, powerful, but inevitably fleeting. It's a living reminder of how striking the past can be, but also proof that, with time, we seek new paths to feed our passion for games. The commercial success of Resident Evil 4 Remake was simply impressive. The game quickly consolidated its position among Capcom's biggest launches, breaking sales records and winning over critics and audiences alike. About 10 million copies were sold in just over 2 years, surpassing the performance of the original itself and becoming the best-selling remake in the franchise. A historic result, especially for a title that revisits a formula already known to many players. But although the commercial numbers show strength, the cultural impact of Resident Evil 4 Remake did not keep up the same pace. As soon as the sales momentum slowed and the initial frenzy calmed down, it became clear that the game failed to establish itself as a lasting phenomenon within gamer culture. That permanence that transforms titles into timeless symbols was missing, even among the classics of the Resident Evil franchise. The remake's presence was intense yet fleeting, marked by peaks of attention during launch, followed by a significant drop in community buzz. This picture becomes evident when observing discussions on forums, social media, and specialized media. In the first few months, Resident Evil 4 Remake dominated trending topics. In-depth analyses were published sequentially, along with debates on fidelity, new content, and technical comparisons. However, over time, the remake lost space to other major releases. No extra expansion or update managed to reverse this trend, showing that, despite its sales merit, its cultural influence was limited to the moment of hype. This contrast becomes even more noticeable when compared to other major remakes and reimaginings, like Resident Evil 2, which maintained discussions about plot, speedruns, fan theories, and the expanded universe for much longer. Resident Evil 4 Remake, instead, was quickly consumed by the industry's accelerated cycle of novelties, where the weight of nostalgia guarantees sales boosts, but does not ensure continued presence. The feeling is that the remake fulfilled its commercial mission, but fell short in the task of becoming a living reference in video game culture. It's interesting to note how Capcom adopted brilliant strategies to ensure financial success, investing in marketing, versions for multiple platforms, and recurring promotions. But even with all this preparation, There wasn't a spontaneous mobilization from players that kept the title in discussion for months or years, as happened with the original Resident Evil. Perhaps the remake character itself limited this permanence. After all, the main target audience already knew the script, the secrets, and soon moved on to new things, making the remake a temporary event. This phenomenon reinforces a dilemma typical of the new generation of games: the search for immediate results, the cult of the launch, versus the achievement of cultural relevance. The success of Resident Evil 4 Remake shows that a remake can sell a lot, exceed expectations, and please veterans and new fans. But that is no guarantee of becoming a lasting landmark. The game made history for its sales, but it failed to remain a central topic in debates, art, memes, or recurring community references, as happened with other emblematic titles in the series. Finally, Resident Evil 4 Remake leaves important lessons for developers and players. Commercial success can be easily measured, but permanence in collective memory depends on other factors, such as innovation, spontaneous engagement, and the ability to generate stories beyond the game itself. In this case, the remake is celebrated for having surpassed numbers, but when it comes to cultural legacy, its brilliance was intense, brief, and above all, transitory.